Moving on to ringworm, what can you tell us about that?
From our livestock point of view, we basically see 2 or 3 different sorts of syndromes. So the classic ringworm, the cattle ringworm, causes thick scabs on the animals, could be anywhere to a greater or lesser extent, invasive locally in the skin, and commonly seen in cattle, young cattle, and then they'll grow out of it with immunity. Worse in winter, the UV sunlight kills it all off. The treatment that we use for that is an antibiotic that comes through in the skin, stays in the skin, and as the skin forms a layer all over the body, and as it grows out, the fungal hyphae that are going in get repulsed, and it just grows out. Kind of expensive, so a lot of people don't worry about it with the livestock, just so long as it's not a major problem. We also get, so that could spread to any of our species. We can also get a different form in the Microsporum group as opposed to the Trichophyton group. And this is a bit more sinister in a way, because it can actually create problems in individual hair follicles. And that can be a real problem in a domestic animal situation, although there are different forms of virus that will affect cattle, sheep, horses, cats, dogs, etc. But the pet is a real problem, because these animals can get a small number of infected follicles, and then those infected hairs get in and affect people, children, or the people that have got reduced immunity. And it can be more severe in the people than it is in the cat or the dog. And so they will come out, as I've seen pictures of them, with sort of multiple spots rather than big pustules, or big scabs, I should say. From a diagnostic point of view, the mechanism is the same, that it gets into where there's any abrasions. But most of these microsporums, from a veterinary perspective, you can pick them up under cobalt filtered UV light, so they glow greenish usually. So you take the cat into a dark room, put the light on it, and you can see them growing. But again, the problem with those ones is that because it's in individual hair follicles, it's not visible. You've really got to look at what you're trying to do with the animals. A lot of them with all the emotion of a pet animal. You still get, I hesitate to use the word resistance, but difficulty in curing cats with antimicrobial therapy to kill them off. So you're actually often better off in bathing animals in something like a pethidine wash repeatedly. That is the same, pretty much the same stuff that you would use on skins if you're prior to surgery. So it's residual to a certain extent deep into the follicles, and it can work on the on the fungal action there as well. But that's the other sort of skin sort of fungal problem we get. And I suppose the third ones that we do get the ordinary aspergillus type issues, which is where the fungus grows, can cause lung problems and abortion, etc. And then there's the other ones that are sort of the micropolysporon type things, which are environmental to a large extent and cause both animals and people almost allergic reactions. So that's an issue. And if we can move on to molds, but because they grow on pastures, but again, some of those like ergot can be real problems for people, but they are also for animals, and they can get nervous symptoms and drop dead on you, which is quite a big problem.
Right. And so in all of those different types that you've described, they can impact people as well as livestock and companion animals. Is that correct?
Yeah, they can do. So I suppose the traditional, I mean, there's zoonoses in some ways that are because they infect all animals. But unlike the ringworm and the scabby mouth, which you would expect to pick up from animals, some of these others, they're both affected from common source like the pasture or mouldy hay, etc. And so in Australia we tend not to get the same sort of respiratory problems because our animals are out so much more than they would be in Europe, say, where they're locked up for large periods in the winter. We used to see a lot of those other types of problems in that situation.
Right. And do people control against, say, ringworm in commercial herds?
I suppose the control in commercial herds, is going to be minimal. You'll get the occasional case where it gets a secondary infection, but in general, no, because as I say, there's so much sunlight, it's going to be pretty much self-limiting. If your herd is commercial, but you're then wanting to be selling bulls, stud cows, then that sort of blemish is potentially a lot of money for you. And so, yes, then people would be treating individual animals much as they would be treating, say, a horse or a dog if it had problems, and they'd be needing to get onto it. I suppose one of the things to suggest is that the spores of, say, your cattle ringworm will hide away in wooden fence posts. So it can get in there, hide away out of sunlight, blah, blah, blah. So I suppose by using metal structures, you're minimizing the hiding place for that, so that animals aren't going to be rubbing where every animal's rubbed for 50 years and still have the spores there. So in that sense, they're probably minor irritants rather than majorly important diseases.
Right. And the life cycles of these organisms, are the 3 different types similar?
Pretty much, as I understand it, they're spore forming the fungi. So the spores, good old bit of protection against drying out and dying under that. So you don't want it too wet, so that's going to rot them away. But you want moisture from time to time. But there's I think a lot of these ringworms will actually also affect your wild mammal species. So out in the wild, there's going to be a fair bit. You can get fungal issues in birds as well. There's certain ones that we see in respiratory problems in birds that are thin, poorly nutritioned, or kept in dirty aviaries, etc., etc. So that certainly could be a source of contamination for individual people. But I suppose the thing that tells me is that both of these conditions we've been talking about, diseases that we've been talking about, the delay time to develop signs is quite significant. So from a medical point of view, it would be kind of difficult to pinpoint and say, oh, well, I've been feeling ill for 3 days, which is a great challenge because, quite a few people will pet cats, dogs, wherever they find them, but we don't know if they're there. And I do find that quite a few people have dogs that have got wounds that they really don't know what they are, but they've always got them. And, oh, yeah, by the way, I've got an itch here, but I don't worry about it, which is a real problem. And only, when was it, Sunday, I was asked by somebody at an endurance event about a particular problem they'd identified in a petting zoo, a petting farm. And so I gave my advice. It wasn't either of these diseases, but it's well known that these petting farms can be a source of problems of spreading disease, and yet skin diseases will take 2, 3, 4 weeks maybe to become apparent.
Right, that's a really interesting point, and that is something that both rural and metropolitan young children tend to go towards. So that's something to be aware of.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a whole load of these zoonoses and some diseases which we haven't even identified as yet are a real risk, and people who we've all got to meet up with it. I mean, they say with the trichophytons, you get it once and you've got a good immunity, but every so often I meet people that say, oh, I've had it 3 times or something. So it's not cut and dried like that. I suppose if you're like myself that's grew up, I mean, I had it when I was knee high to a grasshopper, but my sister got it a few years later, and that was on her tummy, I remember. So she'd have been about 10 or 11, but she did much less work with the livestock on the farm than I did. So we've had it, and I've never had it since. Don't think she has, but she's in a different ball game from me, and so she's never had it before, and I've never had it, despite masses of contact with lots and lots of animals with different forms. So, you know, it's not always cut and dry.
Okay, well, thank you once again, Nigel. That was a really interesting insight into 2 different diseases, not just how they can affect people, but where they come from and how they get from the livestock into the human population. So thank you again.
My pleasure.